What happens when a 17-year-old girl who survived 3 years of intergalactic warfare is forced to sit through algebra class? When someone who commanded starship crews and made life-or-death decisions in the depths of space has to ask permission to use the bathroom? Sarah Chen thought the hardest part of the human-Zephyrian War was over when the ceasefire was signed. She was wrong. The real battle began when she returned to Earth and discovered that while she was fighting for humanity's survival among the stars, her peers were worrying about prom dates and college applications. Now she's back in high school, surrounded by classmates who see her military service as either a joke or a tragedy. They don't understand that the quiet girl in the back row has killed more aliens than they've seen in movies. They can't comprehend that her trembling hands aren't from nervousness, but from muscle memory of weapons that no longer exist. But Sarah is about to learn something that no military training prepared her for. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies don't come from outer space. Sometimes they sit right next to you in chemistry class, and sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with plasma rifles, but with words, courage, and the unbreakable human spirit that refuses to surrender no matter how impossible the odds. This is her story. This is humanity's story, and it's far from over. Sarah Chen stared at the algebraic equation on her tablet screen, the numbers blurring together like star coordinates she used to plot during night watch on the UES Defiance. The classroom around her buzzed with the comfortable chatter of teenagers who had never seen the inside of a military vessel, never felt the cold grip of space through a hull breach, never watched friends die in the vacuum between worlds. Mrs. Chen, perhaps you could enlighten us with the solution? Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through her memories like a plasma cutter through metal plating. Sarah blinked, focusing on the middle-aged teacher who stood expectantly at the smartboard. Around her, 23 pairs of eyes turned to stare at the girl who had returned from war. The answer is x equals -4, Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the same steady tone she had used when reporting casualty numbers to Admiral Morrison. The calculation had taken her less than 3 seconds, a skill honed by years of rapid trajectory computations under fire. Mrs. Patterson looked surprised, checking her answer key. That's Day Detective. Day Detective. Correct. How did you work that out so quickly? Sarah felt the familiar weight of attention pressing down on her shoulders. In space, being noticed meant being targeted. On Earth, in Jefferson High School, being noticed meant something different but equally uncomfortable. Just used to solving problems fast, she replied, turning her gaze back to her tablet. Behind her, Marcus Webb whispered loudly enough for half the class to hear, probably learned it in baby boot camp. A few students snickered, and Sarah felt her jaw clench involuntarily. Baby boot camp. If only they knew. Sarah had been 14 when the Zephyrian Empire first attacked the outer colonies. The aliens had come without warning, their crystalline ships appearing like deadly jewels against the star fields. Humanity's first contact with an alien species had lasted exactly 47 minutes before the shooting started. The recruitment drives had begun within weeks. With adult populations decimated in the initial attacks, the United Earth Space Command had made the desperate decision to lower the enlistment age. Sarah had lied about her age and forged her parents' signatures driven by a combination of patriotic fury and teenage invincibility. She thought she was going on an adventure. The adventure had lasted 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. She had served aboard 4 different ships, survived the destruction of 3 of them, and earned commendations that would never appear on any public record. The war had officially ended 8 months ago when both sides, exhausted and bleeding, had agreed to a ceasefire that everyone knew was just an opportunity to regroup. Now she was back on Earth, back in high school, pretending to be a normal 17-year-old girl. Sarah? Sarah! She jerked back to the present to find Mrs. Patterson standing beside her desk, concern creasing her features. The bell rang, dear. Time for your next class. The classroom had emptied around her while she was lost in memories. Sarah gathered her things quickly, muscle memory making her movements efficient and economical. She had learned to pack fast when the ship's alarm meant you had 90 seconds to reach your battle station. The hallway outside was a chaos of teenage energy that made Sarah's skin crawl. Too many people, too many voices, too many potential threats that her training identified and cataloged. Automatically, exit routes, defensive positions, improvised weapons. Her mind mapped the environment with military precision while her classmates worried about homework and lunch plans. "Hey, war girl!" Sarah turned to find Marcus Webb approaching with his usual crowd of admirers. Marcus was everything Sarah was not: popular, loud, and utterly convinced of his own importance. He was also the son of Congressman Webb, who had spent considerable time during the war questioning the ethics of allowing children to serve in the military. "I heard you killed aliens," Marcus continued, his voice carrying that particular tone teenagers used when they thought they were being clever. "Must have been easy, considering they probably looked just like the ones in Galaxy Defenders." The crowd around him laughed, and Sarah felt something cold and familiar settle in her stomach. In space, Marcus would have been the type to get his squad killed through carelessness and bravado. On Earth, he was just another bully with too much privilege and too little sense. "The Zephyrians don't look like anything from your movies," Sarah said quietly, not breaking stride toward her next class. "Oh, come on," Marcus persisted, falling into step beside her. "Everyone knows the whole child soldier thing was just propaganda. You probably spent 3 years playing video games in some safe bunker while real soldiers did the fighting." Sarah stopped walking. The hallway around them seemed to quiet, though she knew it was just her perception narrowing, the way it always did before combat. Marcus was still talking, but his words faded into background noise as Sarah remembered the sound a Zephyrian made when it died, a crystalline ringing, like breaking glass, that haunted her dreams. She remembered Corporal Davis, barely 16 himself, choking on his own blood while alien bioweapons ate through his respiratory system. She remembered watching the transport ship Mercy's Light break apart under Zephyrian fire, taking 800 wounded soldiers with it. She remembered the taste of recycled air and fear, the weight of a plasma rifle in her hands, the split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death for her squad. "Sarah?" The voice was gentle. Sarah blinked and found herself looking at a girl with short black hair and kind eyes. The crowd around Marcus had dispersed, and the bully himself was backing away with an expression caught between confusion and concern. "I'm Emma," the girl continued, her voice steady and calm. "Are you okay? You looked like you were somewhere else for a minute." Sarah realized her hands were shaking. Not the fine tremor she usually managed to suppress, but the full-body reaction she thought she had left behind in the debriefing chambers on Luna Station. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice sounded strange even to her own ears. Emma nodded, but her expression suggested she didn't believe the lie any more than Sarah did. "Want to walk to class together? I promise not to ask about the war unless you want to talk about it." It was such a simple offer, so completely normal, that Sarah felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. "Okay," she said. They walked together through the crowded hallway, and for the first time since returning to Earth, Sarah felt like she might not be completely alone. Emma turned out to be in Sarah's chemistry class, a subject that reminded her uncomfortably of the chemical weapons the Zephyrians had favored during the siege of Titan Station. But Emma's quiet presence beside her made it bearable, and when their teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, began explaining molecular bonds, Sarah found herself actually listening instead of fighting memories. "The strength of these bonds determines the stability of the compound," Mr. Rodriguez was saying, gesturing at the molecular diagram on the smartboard. "Break the wrong bond and you can change the entire nature of the substance." Sarah thought about people, about how war changed the fundamental bonds that held a person together. She wondered if she could ever be stable again, or if she was doomed to remain a volatile compound, dangerous to herself and others. During lunch, Emma invited Sarah to sit with her small group of friends. They were quiet kids, the ones who read books and worked on art projects instead of gossiping about social media drama. They asked Sarah normal questions: where she was from, what her favorite subject was, whether she liked the cafeteria food, And when she answered with carefully edited versions of the truth, they accepted her responses without suspicion or sarcasm. It was Jason, a thin boy with thick glasses who was apparently some kind of computer genius, who finally brought up the elephant in the room. "I read about the Child Warrior Resettlement Program in the news," he said quietly, picking at his sandwich. "Must be weird, coming back to all this after everything." Sarah tensed, waiting for the usual follow-up questions about whether she had killed anyone or what space was really like. Instead, Jason continued eating his lunch and said, "If you ever want help catching up on the stuff you missed, I'm pretty good with homework. No questions asked." "Same here," Emma added. "And if you ever need to leave class or anything, just let me know. I'll cover for you." Sarah stared at them, these ordinary teenagers who were offering her something no military counselor or government therapist had managed to provide: simple, uncomplicated acceptance. She felt tears threatening and blinked them back, another skill learned in the service. Crying was a luxury she had never been able to afford. "Thank you," she said, and meant it more than they could possibly know. The rest of the afternoon passed more smoothly. Sarah found herself almost relaxing, letting her guard down just enough to participate in class discussions and even smile at one of Emma's jokes. When the final bell rang, she gathered her things with something approaching normal teenage casualness. She was almost to the exit when the fire alarm went off. The sound hit her like a physical blow, every muscle in her body snapping to attention. Red lights flashed, and the computerized voice began its announcement about orderly evacuation procedures. Around her, students began the familiar shuffle toward the exits, grumbling about interrupted plans and delayed buses. But Sarah wasn't seeing the high school hallway anymore. She was back on the UES Defiance 18 months ago, when the Zephyrian strike force had breached the outer hull. The same red lights, the same urgent alarm, the same computerized voice telling everyone to remain calm while death stalked the corridors. She was running, not toward the exit like her classmates, but deeper into the school, toward the imagined threat her combat instincts insisted was lurking somewhere in the building. Her backpack hit the floor as she reached for weapons that weren't there, calling out orders to a squad that existed only in her memory. "Sarah! Sarah, stop!" Hands grabbed her shoulders, spinning her around. Emma's face swam into focus, her expression frightened but determined. "It's just a drill," Emma was saying, her voice cutting through the alarm. "Sarah, it's just a fire drill. Look around, look at everyone else." Sarah followed Emma's gaze and saw her classmates moving casually toward the exits, some laughing, others complaining about the interruption. No one was running. No one was afraid. No one was dying. "Just a drill," Sarah whispered, her breathing slowly returning to normal. Emma nodded, not letting go of Sarah's shoulders. "Just a drill. We're safe. You're safe." As the alarm finally cut off and students began filing back into the building, Sarah realized that her real war was just beginning. The Zephyrians had never been her greatest enemy. The enemy was inside her own mind, and it would take more than military training to defeat it. But looking at Emma's concerned face and remembering the quiet acceptance of her new friends, Sarah thought that maybe, for the first time since the war ended, she might not have to fight this battle alone. That night, alone in her small apartment that the government had provided for veteran minors aging out of the military system, Sarah sat at her desk and wrote the first entry in what her counselor had called a civilian adjustment journal. "Day 1, she wrote, "I think I might survive high school after all." Outside her window, the city lights twinkled like stars, and for once, they reminded her of home instead of targets. 3 weeks into the semester, Sarah had almost convinced herself that she could do this. She had established a routine: wake up at 0600 hours, physical training in her apartment, shower, breakfast, school. Emma had become a constant presence, along with Jason and their small circle of friends. They had created a buffer zone around her, deflecting the worst of the stares and whispers that followed her through the halls. The nightmares still came, but they were manageable, most nights anyway. She was walking to her locker after second period when she saw the crowd gathered near the main office. Students pressed against the windows, voices excited and curious. Through the gaps between bodies, Sarah caught a glimpse of what had captured their attention. 3 figures in military dress uniforms stood in the hallway, their backs ramrod straight and their faces expressionless. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the distinctive insignia of the United Earth Space Command. Her blood turned to ice water. "Oh man, are those actual space marines?" someone whispered nearby. "Look at all those medals. They must be war heroes or something. I wonder what they're doing here." Sarah knew exactly what they were doing here. She turned and walked quickly in the opposite direction, but Emma appeared at her elbow, as if from nowhere. "Sarah, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I need to leave," Sarah said, her voice tight. "Right now." But it was too late. A familiar voice cut through the hallway chatter, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Sergeant Chen. Sarah stopped walking. Around her, conversations died as students realized that the mysterious war veteran in their midst was apparently important enough to warrant a visit from actual military personnel. She turned slowly to face Colonel Harrison, her former commanding officer on the UES Defiance. The man looked exactly as she remembered him. Steel gray hair, hawk-like features, and eyes that had seen too much death to ever be entirely human again. "Colonel," Sarah replied, coming to attention automatically despite being in civilian clothes. "At ease, Sergeant. We need to talk." The crowd of students parted, like they were witnessing something both fascinating and terrifying. Sarah could feel their stares burning into her back as she followed Colonel Harrison and his escorts toward the principal's office. Principal Martinez was waiting for them, looking uncomfortable and out of his depth. The man was used to dealing with truancy and teenage drama, not military visits that required security clearances. "Please have a seat," the principal offered, but the military personnel remained standing. Sarah remained at attention until Colonel Harrison gave her a slight nod. "Sergeant Chen," the colonel began, his voice carrying the same tone he had used during mission briefings, "I'll get straight to the point. The ceasefire with the Zephyrian Empire has been broken." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt, and she gripped the arms of her chair to steady herself. 72 hours ago, Zephyrian forces attacked the mining colony on Kepler 442b. The attack was swift and brutal. No survivors. Colonel Harrison's expression remained neutral, but Sarah could see the familiar tension around his eyes that meant he was holding back his own emotions. "The brass has decided to recommission experienced personnel for what intelligence suggests will be a prolonged conflict. Your combat record makes you a priority candidate for immediate reactivation." Principal Martinez cleared his throat nervously. "Excuse me, Colonel, but Sarah is a student here. She's trying to adjust to civilian life. Surely there are other options." Colonel Harrison turned his attention to the principal with the kind of look that had made grown Marines check their weapons twice. "With respect, sir, this is a matter of interstellar security. Sergeant Chen has specialized combat experience that could save thousands of lives." Sarah found her voice. "What about the other survivors from my unit?" "Corporal Williams has already accepted reactivation. Lieutenant Foster." The colonel paused. Lieutenant Foster took his own life 6 months ago. His family said the adjustment was too difficult. The room went silent. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering Foster's laugh, the way he used to crack jokes during the worst firefights to keep morale up. He had been 20 years old. "I understand this is difficult," Colonel Harrison continued, his voice gentler now. "But we need experienced soldiers, Sarah. The new recruits, they're not ready for what's coming. The Zephyrians have developed new weapons, new tactics. The kids we're sending up there are dying faster than we can train them." Sarah thought about Marcus Webb and his casual dismissal of her service. She thought about all the teenagers in the hallways who treated the war like a video game or a history lesson. She thought about Foster, who had survived 3 years of combat only to lose his final battle against his own mind. How long, she asked. Minimum 2-year commitment, with possible extension depending on the strategic situation. 2 more years. 2 years of plasma fire and death and the endless black between stars. 2 years of watching friends die and making decisions that would haunt her forever. 2 years of being Sergeant Chen instead of just Sarah. But also 2 years of kids like Marcus Webb getting to stay safely on Earth, making jokes about war while other people died for their freedom. I need time to think about it, Sarah said finally. Colonel Harrison nodded. You have 48 hours to decide. Report to Luna Station Processing Center if you choose to accept reactivation. He handed her a data pad with official orders. Your country needs you, Sergeant. Humanity needs you. After the military personnel left, Principal Martinez sat back down heavily. Sarah, I want you to know that whatever you decide, you have support here. This school, these friends you've made, they're real too. Whatever happened out there doesn't define who you are now. Sarah stared at the data pad in her hands. The familiar weight of military orders, the crisp language of duty and service. Part of her felt relieved. Out there in space, she knew who she was. She had purpose, identity, a role to play in something larger than herself. Here on Earth, she was just a broken teenager trying to pretend she belonged. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Word of the military visit spread through the school like wildfire, and Sarah found herself the center of attention in ways she had never wanted. Some students looked at her with new respect, others with fear, and still others with the kind of hungry curiosity that made her skin crawl. Emma found her during lunch, sitting alone in the courtyard behind the science building. Want to talk about it? Emma asked, settling down on the concrete bench beside her. They want me to go back, Sarah said, not looking up from the datapad. There's been another attack. The war's starting again. Emma was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful and thoughtful. Do you want to go back? It was such a simple question, but Sarah realized no one had asked her that. Colonel Harrison had talked about duty and need and humanity's survival, but he had never asked what she wanted. I don't know, Sarah admitted. Out there, I know what I'm doing. I'm good at it. People depend on me, and I don't let them down. Here, she gestured around at the peaceful school campus. Here I feel like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. Who are you pretending to be? A normal teenager. Someone who cares about grades and dances and college applications. Someone who hasn't killed anyone. Emma shifted on the bench, turning to face her more directly. Sarah, can I tell you something about normal? Sarah nodded. Normal is overrated. You want to know what my normal was before you showed up? I ate lunch alone every day because I was too scared to talk to anyone. I spent every weekend reading books because I didn't have any friends to hang out with. I let Marcus Webb and his crowd treat me like I was invisible because it was easier than standing up for myself. Emma reached over and gently took the datapad from Sarah's hands. You changed that. Not because you're some kind of war hero, but because you're the first person I ever met who didn't seem to care about all the stupid social rules that make high school miserable. You're real, Sarah. You don't pretend things are okay when they're not. You don't laugh at mean jokes just to fit in. You actually see people. Sarah felt tears threatening again. I can't sleep without checking the locks 3 times. I can't sit in a room without cataloging all the exits. Yesterday I tackled a freshman because his backpack fell and I thought it was an explosive device. How is any of that normal? It's not, Emma said simply. But that doesn't mean you have to go back to war to be who you're supposed to be. Maybe normal isn't the goal. Maybe the goal is just being yourself, wherever you are. That afternoon, Sarah walked home through the city streets, watching normal people live their normal lives. Families pushing strollers, elderly couples sitting on park benches, teenagers laughing outside a coffee shop, all of them safe because people like her had fought to keep them that way. But also all of them blissfully unaware of what that safety had cost. She thought about Foster, who had tried to build a life after the war and failed. She thought about Williams, who had chosen to go back rather than struggle with civilian existence. She thought about the new recruits Colonel Harrison had mentioned, kids younger than she had been when she first enlisted, dying because they didn't have the experience to keep themselves alive. Her apartment felt different when she walked in, charged with the weight of decision. The datapad sat on her kitchen table like an unexploded bomb. 48 hours to choose between two versions of herself: Sergeant Chen, who knew her place in the universe, or Sarah, who was still figuring out how to be human. She made herself dinner and tried to imagine what her life would look like in 2 years if she stayed. High school graduation, maybe college, learning to live with the memories instead of being defined by them. Building real friendships, maybe even finding someone to love who could accept all the broken parts of her. Then, she imagined Williams dying alone in space because she wasn't there to watch his back. She imagined new recruits getting slaughtered because they didn't know the tricks she had learned to stay alive. The phone rang. Sarah? Daddy. It's Emma. I hope you don't mind that I got your number from the office. It's fine, Sarah said, surprised by how glad she was to hear another human voice. I was thinking about what you said earlier, about feeling like you don't belong here. I wanted you to know that you belong with us, with me and Jason and the others. Not because we feel sorry for you or because you're some kind of hero, but because you're our friend. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of words she had never expected to hear. I'm going to tell you something that might sound selfish, Emma continued, but I hope you stay, not for humanity or the war effort or any of that big stuff. I hope you stay because losing you would hurt, because you matter to people here, even if you don't think you do. After Emma hung up, Sarah sat in her kitchen for a long time, staring at the datapad and thinking about belonging. She thought about Foster, who had never found a place to belong after the war ended. She thought about Williams, who had gone back to the only place he felt real. She thought about Emma, offering friendship without conditions or expectations. She thought about Marcus Webb and all the people who would never understand what it cost to keep them safe, but who deserved protection anyway. Most of all, she thought about the person she wanted to become, not the person the war had made her. The decision, when it finally came, felt like stepping off a cliff into empty space. She just wasn't sure yet whether she was falling or flying. Sarah woke up at 0347 hours, exactly 13 minutes before her alarm was set to go off. She had been dreaming about the asteroid mining station where she had earned her first combat medal, watching it break apart under Zephyrian fire while she evacuated wounded civilians to the transport ships. In the dream, one of the civilians had Emma's face. She lay in the darkness for those 13 minutes, staring at the ceiling and listening to the city wake up around her. Somewhere out there, Colonel Harrison was probably preparing for her answer. The datapad with her reactivation orders sat on her nightstand, its surface dark, but somehow still commanding attention. 24 hours left to decide. Sarah got up and went through her morning routine with mechanical precision. Physical training, shower, breakfast. Everything the same as always, except for the weight of choice pressing down on her shoulders. She arrived at school early and found Emma waiting by her locker, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Thought you might need this," Emma said, offering one of the cups. "You look like you didn't sleep much." "Thanks." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully. It was exactly how she liked it. Black, no sugar, strong enough to fuel a starship. She wondered when Emma had learned her preferences so precisely. "So," Emma said carefully, "any closer to making your decision?" Sarah had told her friends about the reactivation offer the day before. Watching their faces as she explained what it meant, Emma had gone pale but said nothing. Jason had asked technical questions about interstellar travel. The others had looked at her like she was already gone. "I keep thinking about all the things I never got to do," Sarah said, leaning against her locker. "Normal teenager things. Prom, graduation, college. Dating someone who doesn't carry a weapon to breakfast." Emma laughed softly. "You know, I never cared about prom until I had someone I might want to go with. The comment hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Sarah wasn't sure she was ready to face. In space, relationships were simple. You watched each other's backs and tried not to get attached in case someone didn't make it home. On Earth, among teenagers, everything was more complicated. "Emma, I know," Emma said quickly. "I know you have bigger things to worry about right now. I just wanted you to know that if you stay, there are people here who care about what happens to you. Not because you're some famous war veteran, but because you're you." The first bell rang and they walked to class together in comfortable silence. Sarah found herself paying attention to small details she usually missed. The way morning light filtered through the windows, the sound of Emma's laugh when Jason made a terrible pun, the ordinary chaos of teenagers being teenagers. Mrs. Henderson was lecturing about the economic factors that led to the war with the Zephyrian Empire, displaying statistics and charts that reduced 3 years of horror to neat graphs and bullet points. Sarah had learned to tune out these sanitized versions of events she had lived through. But today, something made her listen. The decision to lower the recruitment age was, of course, controversial. Mrs. Henderson was saying, critics argued that children lacked the emotional maturity for combat operations. However, desperate times required desperate measures. Marcus Webb raised his hand. But wasn't the whole child soldier program just propaganda? I mean, they couldn't have actually sent kids into real combat situations. Sarah felt every muscle in her body tense. Around her, she could sense her classmates' attention shifting, waiting to see how she would respond to this familiar challenge. Mrs. Henderson looked uncomfortable. "Well, Marcus, the historical record shows that minors did serve in combat roles during the war. Perhaps we should move on to—" "Come on," Marcus interrupted, turning to look directly at Sarah. "Everyone knows the military just used kids for publicity. They probably spent the whole war playing video games in some safe bunker while real soldiers did the fighting." The classroom went dead silent. Sarah stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. She could feel 30 pairs of eyes on her, could sense the tension that preceded either violence or revelation. "You want to know what children did during the war, Marcus?" Sarah's voice was quiet, controlled, but there was something in it that made several students lean back in their seats. She walked to the front of the classroom, her movements carrying the fluid grace of someone accustomed to moving through zero gravity. "Mrs. P." Henderson opened her mouth to object, but something in Sarah's expression made her close it again. "Children learn to shoot plasma rifles before they learn to drive cars," Sarah continued, her gaze fixed on Marcus. "They learn to perform emergency surgery in the corridor of a dying ship. They learn to make decisions about who lived and who died when there wasn't enough oxygen for everyone." She picked up Mrs. Henderson's tablet and connected it to the classroom display. Her fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency, pulling up files that weren't supposed to exist in civilian databases, but somehow did anyway. "This is the UES Defiance," she said, displaying an image of a massive starship. "Home to 3,000 crew members, including 47 minors. I lived on that ship for 18 months. The image changed to show the ship's interior. Long corridors lined with blast doors. Crew quarters the size of closets. The bridge where Sarah had spent countless hours monitoring sensor readings and calculating jump coordinates. "This is where I slept," she said, showing a narrow bunk with military precision. "This is where I ate. A mess hall filled with people in uniform. This is where I watched my friends die." The final image made several students gasp. It showed the aftermath of a battle, the ship's medical bay filled with wounded soldiers. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, was a young girl in a blood-stained uniform holding the hand of a dying Marine. "That's me," Sarah said simply. "I was 15. Marcus had gone pale, but his mouth was still moving. "That could be anyone. That could be fake." "Shut up, Marcus," the voice came from Jason. Quiet Jason, who never spoke up in class, never confronted anyone. He was staring at his tablet, his face reflecting the blue glow of whatever he was reading. "I just pulled Sarah's service record from the public military database," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "She's not lying. She was awarded the Soul Cross for single-handedly holding off a Zephyrian boarding party while the ship's engines were repaired. She was promoted to sergeant at age 16 after her commanding officer was killed in action and she took command of her unit. She has 17 confirmed kills and was wounded in action 4 separate times." Jason looked up at Sarah, and she saw something like awe in his eyes. "You saved the entire ship. You saved 3,000 people." The classroom was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Sarah looked at her classmates, at their shocked faces and wide eyes, and realized she had just destroyed the carefully constructed normal life she had been trying to build. "Mrs. Henderson," she said quietly, "may I be excused?" The teacher nodded mutely, and Sarah gathered her things and walked out of the classroom. Behind her, she could hear the explosion of whispered conversations, but she didn't look back. She found herself in the school's courtyard, sitting on the same bench where she and Emma had talked the day before. The weight of revelation sat heavily on her shoulders. In trying to defend herself against Marcus's ignorance, she had revealed truths she had spent months trying to hide. Now everyone would know. Now she would never just be Sarah again. "Hey!" Emma appeared beside the bench, slightly out of breath like she had been running. She sat down without invitation, close enough that their shoulders touched. "That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid," Emma said after a moment. "Probably both," Sarah replied. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching other students move between classes, normal kids living normal lives that Sarah had just proven she could never really share. "Does it change things?" Sarah asked finally. "Knowing what I've done?" Emma was quiet for so long that Sarah thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful and careful. "It makes me sad," Emma said. "Not because of who you are, but because of what was taken from you. You should have been worrying about homework and crushes and stupid teenage drama. Instead, you were fighting a war." She turned to look at Sarah directly. "But it doesn't change how I feel about you. If anything, it makes me admire you more. Not because you're some kind of hero, but because, despite everything you've been through, you're still trying to be kind. You're still trying to build something good." Sarah felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "I don't know how to be a normal teenager, Emma. I don't know how to care about the things you're supposed to care about at 17. "Then don't," Emma said simply. "Be 17 the way you need to be. Care about the things that matter to you. Let the rest of us catch up." The bell rang, signaling the end of the period, and students began filing past them toward their next classes. Sarah watched them go, wondering how many of them would look at her differently now. "I think I know what I'm going to tell Colonel Harrison," Sarah said quietly. Emma nodded. "Whatever you decide, I'll support it. We all will." That afternoon, Sarah walked home with a strange sense of lightness. The secret she had been carrying for months was finally out, and while the reactions had been mixed, the world hadn't ended. Some students had looked at her with new respect, others with fear or suspicion, but many had simply continued treating her the same way they always had. Jason had caught up with her after school, babbling excitedly about military technology and asking if she would help him with a robotics project that could apparently benefit from her zero-gravity maneuvering experience. His enthusiasm had been so genuine and innocent that Sarah had found herself agreeing before she knew what she was saying. Her apartment felt different when she walked in, not charged with decision this time, but settled, like a question that had finally been answered. She made dinner and ate it slowly, savoring flavors that weren't recycled protein paste. She watched the sun set through her window, painting the city in shades of gold and orange that reminded her of sunrise on Europa. Then she picked up the datapad and began to type. Her message to Colonel Harrison was brief and professional, the kind of communication she had been trained to write during her years of service. But the words carried the weight of a choice that would define the rest of her life. After she sent it, Sarah sat back in her chair and thought about Foster, who had never found a way to live with his memories. She thought about Williams, who had chosen duty over healing. She thought about all the young recruits who would face the Zephyrians without the benefit of her experience. Then she thought about Emma, offering friendship without conditions. She thought about Jason's excited questions and Mrs. Henderson's awkward attempts to include her in normal classroom discussions. She thought about the life she was choosing to build, one careful day at a time. The response came faster than she had expected. Message received and understood, Sergeant Chen. Your country thanks you for your service. Good luck with your civilian adjustment. Colonel Harrison, United Earth Space Command. Sarah deleted the conversation thread and put the datapad away. Tomorrow, she would go to school and face whatever reactions awaited her. She would help Jason with his robotics project and listen to Emma's stories about her weekend. She would endure Marcus Webb's inevitable attempts to challenge her again, and she would learn to live with being known instead of hidden. But tonight, for the first time since the war ended, Sarah Chen went to sleep without checking the locks on her door 3 times. Outside her window, the stars shone down on a world at war, but they no longer called to her. She had found her place, and it was here. 2 months after Sarah's revelation in history class, Jefferson High School had settled into a new normal. The initial wave of curiosity and whispered conversations had faded, replaced by something Sarah hadn't expected. Acceptance mixed with a strange kind of protective respect from her classmates. It started small. Students began giving her space in the hallways without making it obvious. Teachers stopped calling on her during discussions about the war, sensing her discomfort with being treated as a living primary source. Even Marcus Webb had backed off, though Sarah suspected that had more to do with his father's political position than any real change of heart. The biggest surprise came from an unexpected source. Chen! Sarah turned to find Coach Martinez approaching across the gymnasium, her expression unreadable. Sarah had been exempted from physical education due to what her file diplomatically called service-related fitness modifications, but she sometimes used the empty gym during lunch periods to work through the combat drills that kept her muscle memory sharp. Yes, ma'am. I've been watching you train, Coach Martinez said, gesturing toward the corner where Sarah had set up an improvised obstacle course using gymnastics equipment. Where did you learn to move like that? Sarah hesitated. Most adults either treated her military service with uncomfortable reverence or tried to pretend it hadn't happened at all. Coach Martinez was doing neither. Zero-gravity combat training, Sarah replied honestly. Different physics, but the principles carry over. Coach Martinez nodded thoughtfully. I've got a situation. The girls' soccer team is struggling, and not just with skills. They're getting pushed around by teams from other schools, both literally and psychologically. They need someone to teach them how to be tough. I don't know anything about soccer, Sarah said. I'm not asking you to coach soccer. I'm asking you to teach them what you know about not backing down when someone tries to intimidate you. Sarah looked across the gym to where a group of girls were practicing kicks against the wall, their movements tentative and uncertain. She recognized something in their posture that reminded her of new recruits during their first week of training. Talented, but lacking confidence. What exactly are you asking me to do? Assistant coach, help me teach them mental toughness, how to read situations, how to stay calm under pressure. The kind of things they don't teach in regular sports psychology. Sarah found herself agreeing before she had fully thought it through. Within a week, she was spending her afternoons on the soccer field, teaching 17 teenage girls lessons she had learned in the depths of space. Situational awareness, she told them during their first training session, watching as they practiced passing drills. You're so focused on the ball that you're missing everything else happening around you. In combat, that gets you killed. In soccer, it gets you scored on. She taught them to read body language, to anticipate their opponent's moves, to stay calm when the other team was trying to psyche them out. She showed them breathing techniques for managing adrenaline and visualization exercises for maintaining focus under pressure. Most importantly, She taught them that being tough didn't mean being aggressive. Real strength is staying disciplined when everyone around you is losing their minds, she explained after a particularly brutal scrimmage against a team known for their dirty play. It's making the smart decision instead of the emotional one. It's protecting your teammates even when you're getting beaten up yourself. The girls listened with the kind of attention Sarah had only seen from soldiers who understood that the information might save their lives. Within a month, they had transformed from a struggling team into something formidable. Emma started coming to the practices, ostensibly to do homework on the bleachers, but actually to watch Sarah in her element. There was something different about Sarah when she was teaching. More confident, more grounded, like she had found a way to use her past that didn't involve dwelling in it. "You're good at this," Emma observed one afternoon as they walked home together after practice. "It's not that different from training new recruits," Sarah replied. "Same basic principles: build confidence, teach teamwork, prepare them for situations they haven't faced yet." "Is that what you want to do? Coaching?" Sarah considered the question. She had been accepted to 3 colleges with full scholarships courtesy of veteran education benefits, but she had been putting off making a decision about her major. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I never thought about having options before. In the military, your next assignment gets decided for you." They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the corner where their paths diverged. Emma lived in the suburban neighborhood where most of their classmates' families had houses with yards and garages. Sarah's apartment was in the downtown area, closer to the community college and the Veteran Services office. "Sarah," Emma said as they prepared to part ways, "would you maybe want to come over for dinner this weekend? My parents keep asking about you." Sarah felt the familiar spike of anxiety that came with meeting new adults. Parents asked different questions than teenagers, and their expectations were often harder to navigate. "What did you tell them about me?" "The truth," Emma said simply, "that you're my friend, that you've been through some difficult things, and that you're one of the strongest people I know." They know about the military service. They know what everyone knows now. But they're not going to interrogate you or treat you like some kind of curiosity. They're just parents. They want to meet the person who's important to their daughter. The phrase "important to their daughter" hit Sarah with unexpected force. She had gotten used to thinking of herself as Emma's friend, but hearing it described from a parent's perspective made it feel more real, more significant. "Okay," she said, "I'd like that." Emma's face lit up with a smile that made Sarah's chest feel tight in a way that had nothing to do with anxiety. That Friday evening, Sarah found herself standing on the porch of a modest 2-story house in the kind of neighborhood she had only seen in movies before the war. Emma answered the door wearing a sundress instead of her usual jeans and t-shirt, and Sarah suddenly felt underdressed in her standard outfit of dark pants and a plain button-down shirt. "You look nice," Emma said, and Sarah realized she was staring. "So do you," Sarah managed, following Emma into the house. Emma's parents turned out to be exactly what Emma had promised: normal people who were genuinely interested in getting to know their daughter's friend without making her military service the center of conversation. Her father worked in software development and asked Sarah thoughtful questions about her college plans. Her mother was a nurse who seemed to understand without explanation why Sarah sometimes flinched at unexpected sounds. Dinner was a revelation. Not the food, though that was excellent, but the experience of sitting around a table with a family and talking about ordinary things. Emma's younger brother complained about his math teacher. Her father told stories about debugging problematic code. Her mother described funny incidents from the hospital. No one asked Sarah to explain herself or justify her past. They simply included her in their normal family dinner, and for 2 hours she felt like she was part of something she had thought was lost to her forever. After dinner, Emma walked her to the bus stop. "Thank you," Sarah said as they waited for the evening bus that would take her back to downtown. "For what?" "For letting me see what normal looks like, what it feels like." Emma stepped closer, close enough that Sarah could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "Sarah, can I ask you something personal?" Sarah nodded, though her chest was tightening again. "Before the war, did you ever think about what you wanted? Not what you were supposed to want or what other people expected, but what you actually wanted for yourself?" It was such a simple question, but Sarah found herself struggling to answer. She had enlisted at 14, lying about her age and forging documents because she thought it was the right thing to do. Everything since then had been about duty, service, survival, and trying to fit into a world that no longer made sense to her. "I wanted to be an astronaut," she said finally. "Not a soldier. I wanted to explore, to discover new things. I used to stay up all night reading about exoplanets and imagining what it would be like to see alien sunsets." "You still could," Emma said softly. "The war's not over, but it doesn't have to define everything you do for the rest of your life." The bus pulled up, its brakes hissing in the evening air. Sarah climbed aboard but turned back before the doors closed. "Emma, what do you want?" "For yourself, I mean." Emma smiled, and Sarah felt that tightness in her chest again. But this time it wasn't anxiety. "I want to be a writer. I want to tell stories about people who find ways to be brave in ordinary circumstances." She paused, her expression becoming more serious. "And I want to share those stories with someone who understands what real courage looks like." The bus doors closed before Sarah could respond, but as she found a seat and watched the familiar neighborhoods roll past the window, she realized she was smiling. The following Monday brought news that changed everything again. Sarah was helping the soccer team practice corner kicks when Principal Martinez appeared at the edge of the field, his expression grim. He caught Coach Martinez's attention and gestured toward Sarah. "Chen!" Coach Martinez called. "The office. Now." Sarah jogged over to where the principal was waiting, her mind automatically running through possibilities. Had she done something wrong? Were there new complications with her veteran status? "Sarah," Principal Martinez said as they walked toward the building, "there's been a development. The Secretary of Defense is coming to visit the school." Sarah stopped walking. "What? Tomorrow? She wants to meet with you personally. Something about a new initiative for veteran reintegration." The principal looked as uncomfortable as Sarah felt. "There's going to be media coverage, press conference, the whole thing." Sarah felt the world tilting around her, the same sensation she had experienced when Colonel Harrison first appeared with her reactivation orders. "I can't do that," she said quietly. "Sarah, this is the Secretary of Defense. This is a direct request from the highest levels of government." "I don't care if it's the president himself," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the same edge it had when she told Marcus Webb about the reality of child soldiers. "Teddy, I'm not a poster child for military recruitment. I'm not going to be paraded around to make politicians feel better about sending kids to war." Principal Martinez looked genuinely sympathetic. "I understand your position, but I'm not sure we have a choice here." Sarah looked back at the soccer field, where Emma was sitting on the bleachers doing homework and the girls were continuing their practice without her. She thought about the normal life she had been carefully building, brick by brick, day by day. She thought about Foster, who had been used by the military's public relations machine before he died. With Trust Teddy, she thought about Williams, who had never gotten the chance to say no. "Yes, we do," Sarah said finally. We absolutely have a choice." What followed would become the most difficult decision she had made since choosing not to re-enlist, but it would also be the most important, because sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't charging into battle. Sometimes it's refusing to fight the wrong war. Sarah sat in Principal Martinez's office the next morning watching through the window as news vans assembled in the parking lot like predators gathering around wounded prey. The Secretary of Defense's convoy had arrived an hour earlier, and the school had been transformed into a carefully orchestrated media event. "Last chance to reconsider," Principal Martinez said, straightening his tie nervously. "The Secretary is expecting to meet with you. The press conference is scheduled for noon." Sarah remained in her chair, her posture relaxed but her eyes alert. She had learned long ago that the most important battles were often won by refusing to engage on the enemy's terms. "I told you yesterday, Mr. Martinez, I'm not participating in this circus." The door opened without a knock, and 3 people in expensive suits entered the office. Sarah recognized the woman in the center from news broadcasts, Secretary of Defense Patricia Hawthorne, a career politician who had never served in the military but spoke often about supporting the troops. "Miss Chen," Secretary Hawthorne said, extending her hand. "It's an honor to finally meet you." Sarah didn't stand or shake the offered hand. "Ma'am," the secretary's smile faltered slightly, but she pressed on with practiced political smoothness. "I understand you have some concerns about today's event. I want you to know that this initiative is all about supporting young veterans like yourself in their transition to civilian life. By exploiting them for publicity?" Sarah replied calmly. One of the secretary's aides, a young man who looked like he had never been in a situation he couldn't control, stepped forward. "Miss Chen, I think you misunderstand. This is an opportunity for you to serve your country again, to be an inspiration for other veterans struggling with reintegration." Sarah finally stood, but not in deference. She moved with the fluid grace that came from years of combat training, and something in her posture made all 3 visitors take an unconscious step backward. "Let me tell you what I understand," Sarah said, her voice carrying the same quiet authority she had used when commanding a squad under fire. "I understand that you want to use my story to make people feel good about sending more children to war. I understand that you need a success story to counteract all the reports about veteran suicides and failed reintegration programs." She took a step closer, and the aide actually moved behind the secretary. "I understand that Lieutenant Foster killed himself because he couldn't live with what the war did to him, but that won't be mentioned in your press conference. I understand that dozens of my former squad mates are struggling with addiction, homelessness, and PTSD, but they're not photogenic enough for your cameras." Secretary Hawthorne's political mask was slipping, revealing something harder underneath. "Miss Chen, you have a duty." "I fulfilled my duty," Sarah cut her off. "I spent 3 years fighting and bleeding and watching my friends die for this country. I've earned the right to choose how I live the rest of my life." The room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of reporters setting up their equipment outside. "You can't force me to participate," Sarah continued, "and if you try to hold your press conference without me, I'll hold my own. I'll tell them about Foster. I'll tell them about the real cost of using children as soldiers. I'll tell them about every politician who voted to lower the recruitment age while keeping their own kids safely in boarding schools." Secretary Hawthorne's aide was frantically typing on his phone, probably communicating with someone higher up the chain of command. The secretary herself looked like she was calculating political costs and benefits. "What do you want?" she asked finally. Sarah pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and handed it to the secretary. "I want you to read this. All of it, out loud, to the press." The secretary unfolded the paper and scanned its contents, her expression growing increasingly uncomfortable. "This is," she began. "The truth," Sarah finished. "The real statistics about veteran suicide rates, the actual costs of the child soldier program, the names of every minor who died in service during the war, including Foster. You're asking me to commit political suicide. I'm asking you to do your job, to actually support the troops instead of just using them as props." The aide looked up from his phone. "Ma'am, we could proceed without her. Find another veteran who's more cooperative." Sarah smiled, and there was something in that expression that made Principal Martinez grateful. He had never been on the receiving end of her combat skills. "Go ahead," she said. But I'll be giving my own press conference at the same time, and I have documentation for everything I've said. Service records, medical reports, correspondence with families of KIA soldiers." She paused. "Including my own psych evaluations where I detailed exactly what it's like to kill someone before you're old enough to vote." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Secretary Hawthorne folded the paper and put it in her jacket pocket. "The event is canceled," she said curtly. "Tell the press there was a scheduling conflict." After the secretary and her entourage left, Principal Martinez slumped in his chair like he had just survived a natural disaster. "Sarah," he said weakly, "I don't think I fully understood what you've been through until just now." Sarah sat back down, feeling drained but oddly satisfied. "Most people don't. And that's okay. But I'm not going to let anyone use my story to make the same mistakes again." She looked out the window, where the news crews were packing up their equipment with obvious disappointment. "I just want to be a high school student." Is that too much to ask? Principal Martinez managed a weak smile. "After what I just witnessed, I think you can be anything you want to be." The rest of the day passed in a strange bubble of normalcy. Word of the canceled press conference spread through the school, but the details remained vague. Sarah went to her classes, helped with soccer practice, and had lunch with Emma and Jason like nothing had happened. It wasn't until she was walking home with Emma that the reality of what she had done began to sink in. "So you basically told the Secretary of Defense to get lost?" Emma asked, her voice caught between admiration and disbelief. "I told her I wasn't going to be her propaganda tool," Sarah replied. "There's a difference." Emma was quiet for several blocks. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "You know what I realized today? You've been fighting this whole time, not with weapons or in space, but for the right to be yourself. For the right to choose your own path." Sarah considered this. "I never thought about it that way. Maybe that's the real story. Not the war hero who saved everyone, but the person who saved herself." They had reached the corner where they usually separated, but neither of them moved to leave. "Emma," Sarah said, gathering courage for a different kind of battle, "would you like to go out with me sometime? Actually, go out, I mean. Like a date." Emma's face lit up with the kind of smile that made Sarah understand why people fought wars to protect the things they loved. "I thought you'd never ask," Emma replied. "I was starting to think I'd have to take on the Secretary of Defense myself to get your attention." They made plans for the weekend, normal teenager plans that involved movies and dinner and the kind of comfortable nervousness that came from wanting to impress someone who already knew all your secrets. As Sarah walked home alone, she thought about the path that had brought her here. From a 14-year-old girl who thought she could save the world by lying her way into the military, to a 17-year-old who had learned that sometimes the most important battles were the ones you refused to fight. Her apartment felt different when she walked in. Not empty, like it used to, but peaceful, full of possibility, instead of haunted by memory. She made dinner and did her homework like any normal student. She called Jason to discuss their robotics project and texted with one of the girls from the soccer team about strategy for their upcoming game. Later that evening, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Sarah? This is Captain Williams. I wanted to call and thank you." Sarah's heart skipped. She hadn't heard from Williams since he had re-enlisted months ago. "Thank you for what?" "For saying no. For refusing to let them turn us into recruitment posters. Word is getting around up here about what happened today. A lot of us are starting to ask why we came back when people like you are fighting the real fight on Earth." Sarah closed her eyes, thinking about her former squad mates somewhere in the darkness between stars. "How are you doing, Williams?" "Better now, knowing that someone is making sure they don't forget the cost of what we did up here." Making sure Foster's death means something. After they hung up, Sarah sat by her window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, the war continued. Ships full of young soldiers faced an enemy that humanity still didn't fully understand, fighting battles that would determine the future of the species. But here on Earth, in a small apartment in an ordinary city, a girl who had seen too much war was learning how to build peace. She thought about Emma's smile and Jason's enthusiasm for their project. She thought about the soccer team and how proud they had been when they won their first game using the tactics she had taught them. She thought about all the ordinary moments that were anything but ordinary when you had thought you might never get to experience them. The stars outside her window no longer called to her with promises of duty and purpose. She had found her purpose here, in the daily choice to build something better instead of destroying something else. Tomorrow, she would go to school and be a normal student. She would help teenagers learn that strength didn't come from violence, that courage could be quiet, that the most important victories were often invisible to everyone except the people whose lives they changed. She would be Sarah Chen, not Sergeant Chen. She would be a girlfriend, and a friend, and a student, and a coach, and all the things she had thought war had stolen from her forever. And someday, when other veterans came home broken and lost, she would be there to show them that it was possible to build a life worth living from the pieces of the one that had been shattered. That night, for the first time since the war began, Sarah Chen went to sleep and dreamed about the future instead of the past. Outside her window, the stars continued their ancient dance, but they were no longer calling her to war. They were lighting the way home. The veteran girl's struggle in high school hell continues. Part 2. Best HFY Sci-Fi Stories. HFY.